your life in every way. Perhaps you're wondering why things seem so difficult before you reach what God has promised. The truth is, before using us for something great, God leads us through a process of preparation. This process, which we call God's tests, is not meant to discourage us, but to shape and transform us into instruments of His will. In this video, we'll explore the 7 tests God allows in our lives before using us. Purpose, patience, obedience, faith, character, humility, and perseverance. Each of these tests plays a crucial role in His plan to prepare you for something extraordinary. By the end, you'll understand that even during the toughest moments, God is working behind the scenes to fulfill His purpose for you. Stay with me until the end, because this message could change the way you see the challenges in your life. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more inspiring and uplifting content. The first test, the test of purpose. Before God uses someone powerfully, He first leads them through the test of purpose. This is the initial stage, where He aligns our hearts and understanding with the calling He has for our lives. The test of purpose is essential because without clarity about what God wants to accomplish, we may lose our way or stray from the path He has prepared for us. A clear example of this test is found in the life of Joseph, as described in the book of Genesis. Joseph, the beloved son of Jacob, was also the target of jealousy and envy from his brothers. Even as a young man, God had already planted a greater purpose in Joseph's life, revealed to him through dreams. In Genesis 37, we find the 2 dreams God gave to Joseph. In the first, Joseph tells his brothers, "We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field, when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it." Genesis 37:7. In the second dream, he says, "I had another dream, and this time the sun and moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me." Genesis 37:9. These dreams were not random visions, but a message from God to Joseph, indicating his future role in leadership and salvation. However, as a young and inexperienced man, Joseph did not fully understand the significance of the dreams. Perhaps unwittingly, he shared them in a way that further fueled his brother's jealousy. This is where the test of purpose begins. God gave Joseph a glimpse of the future, but did not reveal the details of how he would get there. This is a common characteristic of God's work. He plants a purpose or vision in our hearts, but allows difficult circumstances to shape and prepare us for it. In Isaiah 55:8-9, the Lord declares, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." This reminds us that God's purpose often transcends our immediate understanding. Returning to Joseph's story, his brother's jealousy led to something tragic. In Genesis 37:23-28, we read how they stripped him of his robe, threw him into a cistern, and eventually sold him as a slave to a caravan of Ishmaelites. This series of events seemed to completely contradict the dreams of greatness Joseph had received. He went from being a beloved son to a slave in a foreign land. Yet, even in this apparent defeat, God was working to shape Joseph's character and guide him toward his ultimate purpose. Joseph's journey teaches us that God's purpose in our lives often begins to unfold amidst pain, rejection, and difficulties. This doesn't mean God desires our suffering, but that He uses all circumstances for the good of those who love Him, as written in Romans 8:28. "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose." Joseph was taken to Egypt, where he was sold as a slave to Potiphar, an official of Pharaoh. Even in such a humbling position, Joseph chose to remain faithful to God. His dedication and integrity soon stood out, and he was appointed as the administrator of Potiphar's entire household. Genesis 39:2-6. This shows that even when we are far from the ultimate purpose, our faithfulness in the present is a way of honoring God and allowing Him to continue shaping us. However, Joseph's test of purpose was far from over. He faced further injustices, including false accusations from Potiphar's wife and unjust imprisonment, Genesis 39:13-20. During these years of apparent abandonment, God was refining Joseph's character, teaching him patience, humility, and unwavering trust in the divine plan. This is an important lesson for all of us. Even when we don't understand why we're facing hardships, we can trust that God is working to fulfill His purpose in our lives. Joseph remained steadfast, and in God's perfect timing, he was elevated from prison to the position of governor of Egypt, responsible for saving countless lives during a devastating famine. What once seemed like a distant dream in his youth became a reality at the perfect moment, demonstrating that God's purpose always comes to fruition. The test of purpose teaches us that God may lead us down paths that seem contrary to the calling He has given us, but every step is part of the process of shaping us. We must trust that He is in control, even when we don't fully understand what is happening. With the test of purpose in mind, we understand that God not only reveals a calling, but also prepares us for it. However, this preparation is never immediate or free from challenges. The next test, which we will now explore, is the test of patience, where God teaches us that His timing is always perfect and that waiting is part of the transformative process. The second test, the test of patience. The test of patience is perhaps one of the most challenging we face in our walk with God. It teaches us that His timing is perfect, even when it seems like everything is at a standstill or that our prayers are going unheard. Waiting, however, is never a sign of divine neglect. On the contrary, it is during this period that God works in us and through us, shaping our character and preparing us for the purpose He has already determined. One of the greatest biblical examples of this test is found in the life of Abraham, the father of faith. In Genesis 12:2, God makes an extraordinary promise to Abraham. "I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing." This promise included the gift of a son, something that seemed impossible since both Abraham and his wife Sarah were advanced in age, and she was barren. Even so, Abraham believed in God's word, and his journey of faith began. However, there was a long period of waiting between the promise and its fulfillment. According to Genesis 21:5, Abraham was 100 years old when Isaac was born. This means he waited approximately 25 years to see the promise fulfilled. During this time, God was working in his life, teaching him valuable lessons about faith, obedience, and above all, patience. The test of patience in Abraham's life was not without challenges. In Genesis 16, we see a moment when Abraham and Sarah, impatient with the delay, tried to resolve the situation on their own. Sarah suggested that Abraham have a child with her servant Hagar, and thus Ishmael was born. However, this attempt to expedite God's plan brought conflict and consequences that affected the family for generations. This episode teaches us that when we try to rush God's plans, we often complicate our journey even more. Despite this detour, God remained faithful to His promise. In Genesis 18:10-14, the Lord reaffirmed to Abraham and Sarah that they would have a son, even though the situation seemed impossible from a human perspective. When Sarah laughed in disbelief, God asked, "Is anything too hard for the Lord?" This reminder is essential for all of us as we await God's timing. He is sovereign and all-powerful, and nothing is beyond His reach. The test of patience is also evident in other biblical stories. Consider David, who was anointed by Samuel as a young man to be king of Israel. The account of his anointing is found in 1 Samuel 16:13. So Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the presence of his brothers, and from that day on, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David. However, David did not ascend to the throne immediately. He spent years fleeing from Saul, facing dangers and difficulties while waiting for God's timing to reign. During this period, David was shaped into a leader after God's own heart. He learned to trust the Lord, even when circumstances seemed to contradict the promise. In Psalm 27:14, David shares a lesson he learned through his own experience. Wait for the Lord. Be strong and take heart and wait for the Lord. The patience God teaches us is not passive. It requires active trust and perseverance. In Romans 5:3-4, the Apostle Paul writes, "Not only so, but we also glory in our sufferings, because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, hope." This shows us that God uses the waiting period to refine our character and strengthen our faith. When facing the test of patience, it is natural to ask, why is God taking so long? Or even to wonder, has He forgotten me? But it is important to remember that God is never inactive. In Isaiah 64:4 we read, "Since ancient times no one has heard, no ear has perceived, no eye has seen any God besides you, who acts on behalf of those who wait for Him." He is always at work, even when we cannot see it. The test of patience also helps us recognize that God is not just interested in giving us what He promised, but in transforming us in the process. While we wait, He is working on our hearts, aligning our priorities, and teaching us to depend entirely on Him. As written in Psalm 37:7, "Be still before the Lord and wait patiently for Him." Looking at Jesus, we see the perfect example of someone who fully trusted in God's timing. During His earthly ministry, Jesus demonstrated incredible patience, even in the face of rejection, opposition, and suffering. He knew there was a perfect time for everything, as stated in Ecclesiastes 3:1. "There is a time for everything, and a season for every activity under the heavens." The test of patience is not easy, but it is indispensable. It teaches us to trust that God knows what is best and that His timing is perfect. It is not just about waiting, but about how we wait. In Lamentations 3:25-26, we read, "The Lord is good to those whose hope is in Him, to the one who seeks Him. It is good to wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord." As we reflect on the test of patience, we must remember that every moment of waiting is an opportunity to grow in faith and trust in God. Like Abraham and David, we are called to persevere, knowing that God always fulfills His promises in His time, and it is in this waiting process that He prepares us for the challenges and blessings to come. The third test, the test of obedience. The test of obedience is one of the most decisive moments in the journey of anyone who desires to be used by God. While patience teaches us to trust in His timing, obedience challenges us to act even when we do not fully understand what God is doing. This test calls us to submit our will to His, often requiring us to take a step of faith before He reveals the next. One of the most well-known examples of this test is the story of Noah. In Genesis 6:13-14, God says to Noah, "I am going to put an end to all people, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. I am surely going to destroy both them and the earth. So make yourself an ark of cypress wood, make rooms in it, and coat it with pitch inside and out." God described in detail what Noah was to do, and Noah obeyed, even without immediate signs that the flood would happen. Imagine the context in which Noah was living. It had never rained in such a devastating way before, and building an ark of that magnitude seemed absurd. There is no mention that Noah questioned or tried to negotiate with God. He simply did what God commanded. In Genesis 6:22 it is written, "Noah did everything just as God commanded him." This is the essence of obedience, trusting in God's word and acting upon it, even when it challenges our logic or the approval of those around us. Noah's obedience was not easy. He must have faced ridicule and misunderstanding from the people around him. The Bible does not provide details about these reactions, but it is reasonable to imagine that building an ark in a place with no signs of a storm was a cause for scorn. Nevertheless, Noah persevered because he knew that obeying God was more important than pleasing men. In Hebrews 11:7 we read, "By faith Noah, when warned about things not yet seen, in holy fear built an ark to save his family." Obedience is not only about grand gestures or epic projects like building the ark. Sometimes it is manifested in daily decisions that require surrender and submission. Think of the story of Abraham when God asked him to sacrifice his son Isaac. In Genesis 22:2, God said to Abraham, "Take your son, your only son whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you." This command was extremely difficult. Isaac was the son of the promise, the one through whom God had promised to make Abraham into a great nation. Even so, Abraham did not hesitate. In Genesis 22:3 we read, "Early the next morning Abraham got up and loaded his donkey. He took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac." He obeyed promptly, trusting that God had a greater plan, even though he could not understand it at that moment. Abraham's obedience was rewarded when God, at the last moment, provided a ram to be sacrificed in place of Isaac. This story teaches us that obedience is a demonstration of our faith and trust in God, and that He is always faithful to His promises. Another powerful example of obedience is found in the life of Jesus. In Philippians 2:7-8, Paul writes about Jesus. "Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross." Jesus' obedience was not easy. It involved suffering, rejection, and sacrifice. But through this obedience, salvation was made available to all humanity. Obeying God often means renouncing what seems logical or convenient. He may ask us to give up a relationship, a job, or even plans we thought were the right path. When we obey, we demonstrate that we trust God more than our own understanding. As it is written in Proverbs 3:5-6, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your paths straight." Obedience is also a proof of love. In John 14:15, Jesus said, "If you love me, keep my commands." This means that our willingness to obey God is directly tied to our devotion to Him. When we truly love God, we are led to obey, not out of fear, but out of gratitude and a desire to please Him. It is important to remember that obedience does not guarantee a journey free of difficulties, but it guarantees that we will be within God's will, which is always the best place to be. In Deuteronomy 28:2, God promises, "All these blessings will come on you and accompany you if you obey the Lord your God." The blessing of obedience lies not only in the results, but also in the intimacy with God and the peace that comes from knowing we are following His plan. When facing the test of obedience, we can ask ourselves, am I willing to follow God, even when I do not understand everything? This is a question that reveals our willingness to trust Him completely. Obedience is a practical demonstration of our faith and prepares us to receive the promises He has for us. The fourth test, the test of faith. The test of faith is one of the most crucial moments in the journey of anyone who desires to be used by God. Without faith, it is impossible to please Him, as it is written in Hebrews 11:6. And without faith, it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to Him must believe that He exists and that He rewards those who earnestly seek Him. Faith leads us to trust in God, Even when the situation seems impossible, even when everything around us says there is no solution, this trust is essential because it teaches us to depend on God's power and faithfulness and not on our own strength. A classic example of faith in the Bible is the story of David facing Goliath, recorded in 1 Samuel chapter 17. David was just a young shepherd with no military experience, while Goliath was a seasoned and feared warrior, a giant nearly 9 feet tall. In 1 Samuel 17:4 we read, "A champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of the Philistine camp. His height was 6 cubits and a span." This man posed an overwhelming threat both physically and psychologically. While the entire Israelite army trembled in fear before Goliath, David displayed unwavering confidence in God. In 1 Samuel 17:26 he asked, "Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" David understood that the battle did not depend on his strength or abilities, but on God, who is sovereign and powerful. When David was brought before Saul, he reaffirmed his faith in God. In 1 Samuel 17:37, he declared, "The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine." Here we see how David's previous experiences, protecting his sheep and facing wild animals, bolstered his confidence in God. He knew that the same God who delivered him in the past would remain faithful in the present. As he faced Goliath, David did not rely on sophisticated weapons or heavy armor. He refused Saul's armor, saying in 1 Samuel 17:39, "I cannot go in these because I am not used to them." Instead, he took his sling, 5 smooth stones, and confronted the giant armed only with his faith in God. In 1 Samuel 17:45, David proclaimed to the giant, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied." This encapsulates the essence of faith, facing what seems impossible, not based on what we see or have, but trusting in the God who fights for us. David won the battle with a single stone, launched from his sling. In 1 Samuel 17:50 we read, "So David triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone. Without a sword in his hand, he struck down the Philistine and killed him." This victory was not merely a personal triumph for David, but a clear demonstration that when we trust in God, He accomplishes things far beyond our abilities. Just as David faced Goliath, we also encounter giants in our lives. These may not be flesh and blood warriors, but can take the form of insecurity, fear, criticism, doubt, or financial challenges. These giants attempt to paralyze us, make us believe we are incapable, or convince us that God is not with us. However, like David, we are called to face these giants with faith, trusting that God is greater than any problem we might face. Faith does not mean the absence of fear, but choosing to trust in God even amid fear. In Psalm 56:3, David wrote, "When I am afraid, I put my trust in you." This teaches us that having faith does not mean we will never experience moments of doubt or worry, but that in those moments we can turn to God and trust in His power and faithfulness. Another powerful example of faith in the Bible is the story of Daniel's 3 friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. In Daniel 3:16-18, they refused to worship the golden statue set up by Nebuchadnezzar, even under the threat of being thrown into the fiery furnace. They said, "If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and He will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if He does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up." This type of faith is unshakable because it does not depend on circumstances or outcomes, but on trust in God's character. The test of faith teaches us that we cannot rely on our own strength or resources, but must place our full trust in God. In 2 Corinthians 5:7, Paul writes, "For we live by faith, not by sight." This means that even when we do not see a solution, even when everything seems against us, we can rest assured that God is in control. This confidence does not develop overnight. It is built through experiences and the daily practice of trusting God. Romans 10:17 says, "Consequently, faith comes from hearing the message, and the message is heard through the word about Christ." The more we immerse ourselves in God's word, the stronger our faith becomes. When facing the test of faith, we might ask ourselves, do I believe that God is with me in my most difficult battles? This question challenges us to reflect on where we place our trust. When we put our faith in God, He empowers us to face any challenge and emerge victorious, not by our strength, but by His power. The fifth test is the test of character. The test of character is a central point in the journey of those who desire to be used by God. Unlike what we often think, God is not as concerned with what we do as with who we are. He desires that our actions reflect a heart transformed and shaped by His will. This test reveals who we truly are and exposes areas in our lives that need adjustment so we can fulfill God's purpose faithfully and with integrity. One of the greatest examples of tested character in the Bible is Joseph. His story is rich with lessons about how God uses the most difficult circumstances to refine our integrity and prepare us for greater things. As we know, Joseph was sold by his own brothers and taken to Egypt as a slave. This terrible act would have been enough to crush the spirit of many, but Joseph chose to trust in God and remain faithful, even in the face of such injustice. In Genesis chapter 39, verse 2, it is written, "The Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master." This passage shows that even in a difficult and humiliating environment, Joseph demonstrated excellence and integrity in everything he did. He gained Potiphar's trust, who appointed him as the steward of his entire household. However, his integrity would be severely tested. Potiphar's wife attempted to seduce Joseph. In Genesis chapter 39, verse 9, Joseph responds to temptation saying, "How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" Joseph knew that yielding to temptation would not only betray his master, but also be a sin against God. This response reveals a character rooted not in external circumstances, but in a deep commitment to righteousness and obedience to God. Despite acting with integrity, Joseph was falsely accused by Potiphar's wife and thrown into prison. In Genesis chapter 39, verse 20, we read, "Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined." Once again, Joseph faced a situation that could have easily led him to despair or bitterness, yet instead, he continued to display character and trust in God. In verse 21 of the same chapter, it is written, "The Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden." Even in prison, Joseph maintained his integrity, and God used him in that place to interpret dreams and bring hope to other prisoners. He could have chosen to withdraw, complain, or give up, but he chose to remain faithful. This attitude not only sustained him, but also paved the way for him to be elevated in due time to the position of governor of Egypt. The test of character is also evident in other biblical stories. Daniel, for instance, is known for his faithfulness to God in a hostile environment. In Daniel chapter 6, verse 4, we read, "They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent." Even knowing that his life was at risk, Daniel continued praying to God 3 times a day, as was his custom, refusing to compromise his integrity. He was thrown into the lion's den, but God delivered him, honoring his faithfulness. These stories teach us that character is both built and revealed in times of hardship. God allows us to face moments of injustice, rejection, or pain to shape us. In Romans chapter 5, verses 3 and 4, Paul writes, "We glory in our sufferings, because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, hope." This means that in every challenging situation, God is working to transform us into the image of Christ. It is important to understand that character is not something we acquire once and for all. It is continuously refined as we face situations that test our faith, patience, and obedience. Sometimes this involves letting go of things we consider important or enduring criticism for remaining faithful to God. In James chapter 1, verses 2 and 3, we read, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance." In practical life, God allows us to face difficult situations at work, in our families, or in our relationships to reveal areas where we need to grow. Perhaps you are facing a situation where you have been unjustly accused or misunderstood. These moments are opportunities to trust God and demonstrate Christ-like character. As it is written in Proverbs chapter 4, verse 23, "Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it." Guarding the heart means choosing the path of integrity, even when it is not easy to respond to success or promotion. Joseph, when he became governor of Egypt, continued to act with humility and wisdom. He could have used his position to take revenge on his brothers, but he chose to forgive them. In Genesis chapter 50, verse 20, he says to his brothers, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." This reveals a deeply transformed character, shaped by God's love and grace. The test of character reminds us that God does not only call us to do great things, but to be people who reflect His holiness and love. He is not impressed by our talents or achievements, but by a pure and humble heart. In 1 Samuel chapter 16, verse 7, God says, "The Lord does not look at the things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." This truth should motivate us to seek God continuously, asking Him to transform our character so that we may become useful vessels in His hands. If you are facing a situation of injustice or difficulty today, know that God is using this moment to refine you. He is more interested in who you are becoming than in what you are doing. Don't give up. In Philippians chapter 1, verse 6, it is written, "Being confident of this, that He who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion until the day of Christ Jesus." God will not give up on you, and every test you face is part of His plan to shape you. The sixth test is the test of humility. The test of humility is one of the most important in our walk with God. Before He exalts us or entrusts us with great responsibilities, God works in our hearts to teach us true dependence and submission. Humility is not just a virtue, it is a requirement for those who wish to be used by God. As it is written in James chapter 4, verse 6, God opposes the proud, but shows favor to the humble. It is in the place of humility that God shapes our character to reflect His glory. One of the greatest examples of humility in the Bible is Moses. He was born into slavery in Egypt, but was miraculously rescued and raised in Pharaoh's palace. In Acts 7:22, it is recorded, "Moses was educated in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was powerful in speech and action." From a human perspective, Moses had all the qualifications to lead. He was educated, influential, and strong. However, God had different plans for him. Before Moses could be used to deliver the Israelites, he had to go through the test of humility. In Exodus 2:15, we read that after killing an Egyptian and being discovered, Moses fled to Midian, where he spent 40 years in the desert as a shepherd. This time in the wilderness was crucial to teach Moses lessons he could never learn in the palace. He was removed from a position of prominence and brought to a simple life, where he learned to depend entirely on God. During this period, Moses was transformed. Numbers 12:3 states, "Now Moses was a very humble man, more humble than anyone else on the face of the earth." This humility or meekness is a direct reflection of the transformation God worked in him. Before leading an entire nation, Moses needed to become small in the world's eyes and great in God's eyes. Humility is often developed in the desert seasons of our lives. The desert represents times when we feel forgotten, directionless, or powerless over our circumstances. These can be times of financial challenges, family problems, work difficulties, or even moments of silence when God seems distant. Yet it is in these moments that God works on our hearts. The desert is not a place of punishment, but of preparation. In Deuteronomy 8:2, God reminds the Israelites, "Remember how the Lord your God led you all the way in the wilderness these 40 years, to humble and test you in order to know what was in your heart, whether or not you would keep his commands." God uses the desert to teach us complete dependence on him and to reveal what is truly in our hearts. Perhaps you are in a desert right now. It may seem like God is distant or your prayers are unanswered, but remember, the desert is where he prepares your soul for something greater. In 1 Peter 5:6 we read, "Humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that he may lift you up in due time." This verse reminds us that exaltation comes only from God, and it happens at the right time, after we have undergone the process of humility. Another example of humility in the Bible is Jesus himself. In Philippians 2:6-8, it is written, "Who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross." Jesus is the ultimate example of someone who humbled himself completely, trusting the Father to exalt him at the right time. Humility does not mean thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less. It leads us to put God and others first, recognizing that every good gift comes from him. In John 15:5, Jesus said, "I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing." This verse reminds us that we are incapable of achieving anything of eternal value without total dependence on God. In practical life, humility can be demonstrated in how we treat those around us, especially those who cannot offer us anything in return. It can be expressed in how we respond to criticism, in our willingness to serve, or in our attitude toward successes and failures. In Luke 14:11, Jesus said, "For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted." This is a kingdom principle. The more we submit to God, the more he can use us for his glory. The test of humility also teaches us that everything we have and are comes from God. Paul, in 1 Corinthians 4:7, asks, "For who makes you different from anyone else? What do you have that you did not receive? And if you did receive it, why do you boast as though you did not?" This verse reminds us that there is no place for pride in the heart of someone who understands that everything comes from God. If you feel like you are in a place of humiliation or forgotten in the desert, know that God is at work in you. He is shaping your character and preparing you for something beyond your understanding. Isaiah 40:31 states, "But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint." The desert is not the end. It is only the beginning of something greater. The seventh test, the test of perseverance. The test of perseverance is one of the most profound and demanding stages of the journey for anyone who desires to be used by God. Unlike other tests, it not only challenges us to trust and wait, but also to resist and press on, even when everything seems against us. It is in this test that God works deeply within us, refining our faith, character, and hope. Perseverance is a call to remain steadfast, not just for a moment, but throughout the journey, until the promise is fulfilled. One of the most striking examples of perseverance in the Bible is the story of Job. In Job 1.1, we are introduced to him as a man of complete integrity, who feared God and turned away from evil. Job was blessed with a loving family, great wealth, and an apparently peaceful life. However, all of this was taken from him in a short span of time. He lost his children, his possessions, and his health. Yet in Job 1:22 it is written, "In all this, Job did not sin by charging God with wrongdoing." Even in the face of great adversity, Job maintained his integrity. In chapter 2, verse 10, he responds to his wife, who suggested that he curse God and die. "Shall we accept good from God and not trouble?" Job acknowledged that God was in control, even when he didn't understand the reasons for his suffering. This is the essence of perseverance, trusting in God even when there are no explanations or answers. Job's journey is a clear example that the path to the promise is never linear. He faced not only material and physical losses, but also the silence of God. In Job chapter 13, verse 15, he declares, "Though he slay me, yet will I hope in him." This declaration reveals unwavering trust, even amidst the deepest suffering. Beyond his losses, Job faced the misunderstanding of his friends, who unjustly accused him of sin. In Job chapter 19, verse 25, he asserts, "I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end he will stand on the earth." This statement of faith demonstrates that even in his pain, Job had hope in God and believed that in due time he would act on his behalf. At the end of his story, God not only restored Job's life, but also blessed him even more than before. In Job chapter 42, verse 10, we read, "After Job had prayed for his friends, the Lord restored his fortunes and gave him twice as much as he had before." This restoration was not only material, but also spiritual and emotional. God honored Job's perseverance and used his story as a testimony to inspire generations. Perseverance is not something that comes naturally. It is forged in the midst of difficulties. In Romans chapter 5, verses 3 and 4, Paul writes, "We also glory in our sufferings, because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance character, and character hope." This shows us that God uses tribulations to strengthen us and prepare us for greater things. Perseverance is proof that we are willing to trust God, even when all seems lost. Another example of perseverance in the Bible is the life of Paul. He endured persecutions, imprisonments, shipwrecks, and many other challenges in his ministry. In 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 24 to 27, he describes some of his experiences. "5 times I received from the Jews the 40 lashes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was pelted with stones. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a night and a day in the open sea. I have been constantly on the move. I have been in danger from rivers, in danger from bandits, in danger from my fellow Jews, in danger from Gentiles, in danger in the city, in danger in the country, in danger at sea, and in danger from false believers. I have labored and toiled, and have often gone without sleep. I have known hunger and thirst, and have often gone without food. I have been cold and naked." Despite all this, Paul remained steadfast in his mission because he knew his strength came from God. In 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 9, he shares what the Lord told him, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." This is a powerful truth for all of us. God does not call us to persevere in our own strength, but provides His grace to sustain us. In practical life, perseverance can mean continuing to trust God during an illness, a financial crisis, or a difficult relationship. It can mean not giving up on praying for something, even when it seems like nothing is changing. In Hebrews chapter 12, verse 1, we read, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us." The Christian life is described as a long-distance race that requires patience, focus, and perseverance. God tests our endurance, not to punish us, but to strengthen us. In James chapter 1, verse 12, it is written, "Blessed is the one who perseveres under trial, because, having stood the test, that person will receive the crown of life that the Lord has promised to those who love him." Perseverance is rewarded both in this life and in eternity. If you are facing challenges today, remember that God is with you every step of the way. He sees your struggles, hears your prayers, and knows your heart. In Isaiah chapter 41, verse 10, God says, "So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." This promise is a reminder that you are never alone, even in the hardest moments. The test of perseverance challenges us to keep trusting God, even when it seems impossible. It reminds us that the ultimate victory belongs to Him, and that if we remain faithful, we will see His promises fulfilled. The final question is, are you willing to continue even when everything seems against you? Each of these trials, purpose, patience, obedience, faith, character, humility, and perseverance, is an essential part of God's preparation to use our lives in a powerful way. He never abandons us at any stage of the journey, but is always with us, shaping and strengthening us to fulfill the plan He has for us. If this message has touched your heart and you feel you are living through some of these trials, remember, God is preparing something incredible for your life. Don't give up. Trust the process and His timing. Now, if you found this content uplifting, don't forget to like, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more messages that edify and transform. Activate the notification bell so you don't miss any updates. Let's grow in faith together and help more people find purpose in God. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next